Welcome into the Illini Inquirer Podcast. It's Jeremy Werner and Joey Wagner. And we got a lot of news to talk about here on this podcast. It was going to we kind of planned, or at least in my head, I had planned on just talking about the NFL draft and where all the Illini ended up. 4 Illini draftees. Joey and I were present at 2 of the draft parties. Joey was down in Orlando with Johnny Newton. I was in South Dakota, Rapid City, with Tip Ryman and his family. So cool to take in those moments. We will talk about that. We will talk about the fits of where these guys landed and what we think about some of the guys who went undrafted. We also got to talk about some Illini women's basketball transfer commits. Illinois fans are eager for some additions, Joey, but Illini women's basketball is the one filling that void for right now. But we do have to talk about the big news on this Monday, April 29th, is one exit from the Illinois men's program, one exit from the Illinois football program. But Joey, this is supposed to be where things calm down for us, and it was not today on this Monday after we got back from the draft weekends we had.
No, I was joking a week ago. I said we got back from Boston, and my brain was like, all right, we did it. It's time to take a breath, and that was very wrong. And still, it's just been that's what April is now, right, Jeremy? It's transfer portal season, and we are getting to the back end of this thing with the portal closing on the 31st. Maybe you'll see a couple trade deadline-like additions after that. But, yeah, today's been a busy day, and Niccolò Moretti going into the portal is part of that.
Yeah, let's talk about that. Niccolò Moretti is now the 5th Illinois men's basketball player to enter the transfer portal. And not that I think this would have been a surprise before this all started, Joey, but it's later in the process, right? Almost a month and a half into the transfer portal opening, days before the transfer portal closes, Niccolò Moretti enters the transfer portal. Understandably, because his role is really in question. Kylan Boswell is here, Dre Gibbs-Allhorn, and probably Ty Rogers look like the backup options at guard. So it's not too big of a surprise. It's just the timing of it. And now the fact that he's the 5th guy, and you might only have 2 returning scholarship players from the Elite 8 team due to graduations, due to transfers. This is an extreme makeover of this Illinois basketball roster. I don't think Niccolò Moretti makes any of us freak out about what's going on or how this impacts the roster, because let's be honest, he was not going to play probably a huge role on this team, and that's why I understand why he's going in the portal, but it just adds to the layer of, boy, this entire roster, like Brad Underwood is taking this to an extreme in the turnover of this offseason.
Yeah, him entering the portal now is interesting because to take people behind the scenes a little bit, Jeremy, we talk and you say, okay, it would, look, after the Pittsburgh NCAA tournament, we sat and we thought Andre Curbelo is probably a guy who's going to port. You can just guess where roles are, fits are, and we like to be prepared. So you prepare X, Y, or Z story just in case. A lot of them don't see the light of day, right? But some of them do. And this was one you prepared because you knew they were going to bring in another point guard. You knew Dre Gibbs-Allhorn was the guy that they were excited about coming back, and you just kind of wondered where Niccolò Moretti was going to fit into this. But I would have guessed this to happen 2 weeks ago and not now. Also, it kind of adds to the story of a big offseason of turnover. It is crazy, right? We have to acknowledge it's crazy that this Elite 8 team that they had, you're looking at bringing back 2 guys. It's not – some of it is very drastic. Some of it's a picture of what college basketball and college athletics are right now. So maybe somewhere in the middle of that, but Illinois has leaned into the portal in a lot of ways, and I understand it is not for everybody. I get it. It is so much change to monitor, to watch, to think about, to wonder how it's April 29th. There's 5 open scholarship spots on a basketball team that we think is going to be good by the time this all ends. But that's a lot, and it's a lot to happen late. They're kind of getting into early in the summer, late spring. So I get it's kind of jarring, but him in particular, you kind of maybe could have guessed.
Yeah, and I think, Sincere Harris transferring was not a surprise after redshirting. Dane Danger transferring the way, his playing time was up and down was not a surprise. Amani Hansberry, I thought he could have played a role on this team. Luke Goody, I thought he could have played a role on this team.
But when Chester Frazier leaves, 2 of those can get explained away a lot easier, right? And Sincere Harris and Amani Hansberry.
And I understand it from Luke Goody's perspective and why he's going to Indiana, where he is probably valued a little bit more because Illinois already added Jake Davis. They've added Trey White. They're looking to add Benham Rickhouse. Like, they are over recruiting him. And he's like, I've been here 3 years. This is my last year of eligibility. I don't want to play 10 to 15 minutes a game. I want to play 20 plus minutes a game, and I've probably deserved that. So I get it from his perspective. And now you have 5 open scholarships. I doubt they use all of those. Probably 4 is what you're going for. But you've already had
how Brad Underwood's operated, we should say.
Yeah, leaving 1 scholarship open. But
Right.
you've added 4 transfers, and you still probably need 4 more. And you haven't had anything here in a while. So I get some angst from Illini fans. Like, it's been 2 weeks since they've added anybody. We'll see what happens with Benham Rickhouse. If there's anybody else that enters the transfer portal, I know they've been waiting on maybe some guys that could enter the portal. You know, the portal closes May 1st, but you'll still see some names trickle in after that, because all they have to do is put their name in by April 30th, and they could still be in the portal. It takes 48 hours for the NCAA and those schools' compliance departments have 48 hours to kind of check off on those things. But now they got to get starting to add. They got to add more. And that's the thing is, if you don't prioritize retaining some of these guys with NIL dollars, with roles, Joey, you got to upgrade in the portal. You got to fill in the portal. I have full confidence Brad Underwood will do that. But in the meantime, in the next 2, 3, 4 weeks, Illinois fans will be wondering, well, how is he going to fill out this roster? Are they going to hit on their top targets? Is Rickhouse going to be on board? Are they going to get that wing that they're looking for and maybe expect to hit the portal? Are they going to add that big man? So that's where we'll see what Orlando Antigua, Tim Anderson, Jeff Alexander, and Brad Underwood can do over these next couple of weeks, because it has been a quiet 2 weeks in additions.
Yeah, look, they've got a body of work to make you think that they're going to figure this thing out by the time fall rolls around and these guys are all on campus. But I get where it would be a little nerve-wracking when you go 2 weeks without an addition and there's all of these spaces still to fill. And I think I even understand if fans say, man, hey, I would have rather watched Luke Goody for a 4th year at Illinois. I would have rather seen Amani Hansberry take that sophomore jump. And I understand that, because you get excited about these guys when they commit, or in the case of Luke Goody, the last 3 years you've seen of him at Illinois. So there's a lot of reckoning I think people are coming to grips with. It's all reasonable. Like this, it feels like every year we think, oh, okay, this will start to maybe feel normal, and then it just gets a little bit more and more. And whether it be the rule change and the unlimited transfers or just the NIL dollars being thrown around, I understand where it's just, you've got to figure out how you feel about this. But on the other side, we've seen Brad Underwood and this coaching staff add talent. Orlando Antigua doesn't come here with any lack of connections, with any, he's got a past being able to get guys. So you would think that's going to continue here because he's done it here. It's just going to feel like forever to get there. And I think you look at it, right, and I think it's probably going to be the next thing we get into. You're still looking at this roster and saying, okay, well, who's the alpha? Because you've gotten used to seeing an alpha on this team, whether it be Terrence Shannon for 2 years or Kofi Coburn or Iota Sumu, and you just don't see that right now. Maybe Kylan Boswell takes that jump, but I think you think alpha, shot creators, guys who can go get that typically is a wing player, right? Like that's wing player or guard, and that's just not there to this point in time. So I think when you look at the roster as a fan, you think, oh, okay, we got so used to Terrence Shannon doing, getting big buckets on the basketball court. Who's that next year? And that probably compounds into maybe a little bit of the angst that's going on.
Yeah, I look at this roster and the pieces are fitting. That's what I like about this offseason so far, is you're getting skilled and talented players. You got a lead guard in Kylan Boswell. Trey White is a potential NBA talent. Kerry Booth, a potential NBA talent. But the mix of it, Joey, you have no idea how these guys are going to mix together as personalities. None of it's established. That's why I still think Ty Rodgers is so important in this entire thing, is he's been here. He's played it. Dre Gibbs-Allhorn, these are the 2 guys we're talking about. But Dre seems to be bought in to whatever culture that Brad Underwood has. But a lot of it is on Brad Underwood to find the right pieces. And as he said, basically he said, I am the culture. I am the guy who has to demand these things and get the right players for that. So that's what's going to be interesting about how this all comes together, is these transfer heavy rosters of rosters that go 8 transfers, sometimes they blow up. like Arkansas last year. That did not work. Some of them do work, some of them do not work. Like NC State ended up working last year late in the season, but it was not a great regular season for them. So there is risk to what Brad Underwood is doing. There's also the upside of the guys they've lost, like Dane Danger was maybe, and Luke Goody were the most productive players. Dane Danger averaged 10 minutes a game last year. Luke Goody was averaging about 15 minutes a game last year. So they did need to upgrade the talent, and they are doing that. And I expect they will continue to do that.
Yeah, I think it's just such like Brad Underwood effectively saying he's the culture, the keeper of the culture. We're paraphrasing here. It's interesting because you balance that line of thinking, which comes with upgrading your roster. Jeremy, I know you and I have sat in press conferences. Some of those early season, we're like, why did Illinois lose this game? And things are a little bit, you're still in that feeling out December process. And Brad Underwood says something along the lines of, we've got to have our guys lead. If I've got to lead, we're not going to be very good. You've heard that, right? I mean, we've all heard that in press conferences. So it's interesting. And I'm not saying transfers can't come in and lead, right? Like you've seen Terrence Shannon come in and do that. Matthew Meyer, to a degree, did that in 2022. But I do think there's a lot of value in your Ty Rogers, your Dre Gibbs Lawhorn to kind of help usher in the expectations of those guys in those June, July months that they get on campus. So Brad Underwood maybe has to keep and maintain the culture in the summer, and then that gets passed on. But the other side of it, you're getting talent, right? Like that's the other side. And eventually talent's going to win out. But it's like there's a balance there I think is interesting.
Last thought. If you would have told me 2 players are returning on this roster and that one of them was Dre Gibbs Lawhorn, like I would have been surprised. And to be honest with you, he played this well. Like Dre Gibbs Lawhorn is going to have a big role on this team, probably off the bench, but he can handle the ball a little bit. He can score. He can play defense. I think he's going to have a sizable role as a sophomore. So I think this played out pretty well for one Dre Gibbs Lawhorn.
It did, and you really could see it in the postseason. He started, that's another point we could make about Niccolò Moretti is it feels like, and I'm trying, he never really grabbed seeds of that backup point guard, and the injury didn't help. Like he missed time with that injury, but even when he came back, he had that Iowa game, and you say, hey, all right, like this is kind of what you've been hearing about, and then it's like, oh, never mind, Dre Gibbs Lawhorn's the first guard off the bench again. So it feels like there was kind of a tug of war back and forth with those guys for that backup point guard spot, and by the end of the season. DGL started
doing Justin Harmon's minutes by this.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. You saw, really in the postseason, you saw all of this kind of build in him, and he was starting to really feel himself out there. And even if it was in smaller minutes, you could just read it in him, the confidence he was building and kind of that energy he brought.
All right, let's flip over to football, Joe. I think this is a more sizable, newsworthy exit as Andrew Dennis, 4-star prospect, the highest ranked signee in the class of 2024, has entered the transfer portal. You had caught wind of this. We both had caught wind of this over the weekend, and it was just like, what? How is that happening? Because this guy was so bought into the program, but after one semester, he is leaving. And while he wasn't going to play a role this year, I know there was thought he could play a 2 deep. I think that changed with their transfer additions and what we've heard of those transfer additions. TJ McMillan and Kevin Wigginton looked like the backup center. Looked like AJ Dennis was going to need at least a year of adjusting. But this is a long-term loss because he's a very talented player. He is, from what we've understood, a really good kid. Like we've talked to him, really smart, had a leadership kind of quality to him. But this one stinks. Like Trey Smith, Zach Toby, AJ Dennis. We've talked about how a lot of these transfers out were expected, but these 3 young guys leaving, I do think is maybe not a sting for the 2024 season, but certainly a sting for the long term because these guys had shown talent. They were high level recruits, good recruiting wins for Illinois. And I know everyone wants to know the why with AJ Dennis. He's a young guy. I know he's very close to his parents. I know. He wants to be close to home. He told Alan True that, but it just seems like there were some issues that came up in his first semester. Where it was being too far from home, some accountability things that they had to have, and they decided to part ways. But I think this one stinks for the long term for Illinois.
I do too. He was a guy that you would have figured as either a redshirt freshman or redshirt sophomore, whenever that time came, to be a multi-year starter and one of the better offensive linemen on what you think just perpetually with Brett Bielema and Bart Miller at the helm is going to be an upper half of the Big Ten offensive line. So to be someone we would have projected to be the best player on that, not being around anymore, that's a tough loss. It's tough optically, right? You don't see a lot of 4-stars. You see a lot of 4-star talent, right? We don't have to rehash that same conversation, but you don't see a lot of 4 stars roll through and commit. Like it's a big deal when Illinois gets one. It was a big deal when they got AJ Dennis. It's a big deal when you lose one too. And I think you're seeing that people are confused or frustrated. I understand, because he was a guy you thought was going to be somebody who could anchor your offensive line moving forward. And I would expect still Illinois to add an offensive lineman or try to add an offensive lineman in the spring portal window. They have 6 open scholarships, Jeremy, excuse me. I'm not saying it's number 1 or number 2 priority. We'll get into that in a moment. But I do believe that they would be interested in adding an offensive lineman here going into fall camp.
Yeah, because TJ McMillan's a guy I've been high on. He's a redshirt freshman now. He's taking backup snaps during the spring game. I think he can be a multi-year starter. I thought that when they signed him, and I still think that. So it's not like they're empty there. But what I've liked about what they've added offensive line-wise over the last couple of years is they have a margin for error, right? Like I feel like they've recruited well enough that they have a margin for error, especially with what they've added in the transfer portal. But now you need maybe a McMillan to hit. Like there's more pressure on that one to hit and for him to be a starter whenever after Josh Kreutz leaves. But the good thing is you have Kreutz for 2 more years. Then McMillan will be there for 2 more years behind him. But he's got to be a starting quality player, or you got to find something in the portal. Like one semester after he leaves, that's kind of alarming in a single instance. This is happening. Like when guys are able to transfer whenever they want, if there's a sign of issues, maybe it can explode like that right away. And for it to be the highest ranked signee just one semester after he joins your program, that stinks. That stinks. So we'll see where it goes. But if there is one position, if you're looking for a silver lining, they've recruited offensive line well. Still, this is one of the best recruits you've gotten in that room.
Yeah, it's a very small silver lining, I guess, if you want to look. Like you didn't lose a quarterback, right? Or a receiver, or you can go down the line. Like they've got, I do like what they have at offensive line. And I'm not trying to make anyone say, oh well, what a no big deal, AJ Dennis. Like that stinks. It stinks for Illinois. But I think the staff at that position in particular has earned the benefit of the doubt. I think they're going to go be able to add a talented guy. And
there are people in their car listening to this saying, well, last year they said the offensive line would be good, and it wasn't.
So, fair. That's fair. Look, I get it. I get it. And I look until fall, until August, until September. Yeah. Like right now, people are probably just tired of hearing I get all that. I understand the level of angst that people are feeling right now because they want to see some of that play out on the field. I just look at that offensive line room and think if you lose a player the caliber of AJ Dennis 2 years ago, 3 years ago, whenever, like you're probably freaking out a lot more because there was a cliff, there was all sorts of, oh boy, they're mowing outside. Let's see if we can get through that. But like I think they'll find someone, whether it be in the portal or whether it be in the high school ranks, to come in and help kind of ease that void a little bit.
Yeah, we'll see what they do. And I think this is what Illinois fans need. They need an addition for Illinois football. They need, because I thought they did well in the portal for the most part, adding guys like Cole Rusk and J.C. Davis and Kevin Wigginton and Dennis Briggs and Anthony Johnson. That's a concern that he left too. But now that you've lost some long-term talent here in Trey Smith, Zach Toby, and A.J. Dennis, which a lot of programs are right now, but for Illinois, they've done such a good job of retention that this is a little bit of a first time we've kind of seen this early in recruiting classes of Brett Bielema, these guys starting to leave that they're buried on the depth chart, but you could see a long-term role for them long-term. So yeah, like they need to add in the portal, and we've talked about it, 2 corners. They need a defensive lineman, and now they might need an offensive lineman. And they could add at other places, wide receiver we've talked about before. Those would be the top 5 for me, but maybe adding a long-term offensive lineman, maybe not a guy who's going to start right away, but a guy at center could be important to add some competition here. I don't want to just add anybody, but if you can add somebody there, that would be really important. But I think Illinois fans, understandably so, they want to see this roster be upgraded after it's been lost some pieces here. And Anthony Johnson and Zach Toby, especially, who are going to be in the 2 deep, they need to add up. And we know they are being aggressive. Like, they have some NIL dollars to spend, and they're going to be big game hunting, I think, for corners. And I think they can sell a rotation spot for defensive line. And they're pretty quiet in their transfer pursuits here, Joey. So I don't know if we're going to hear a lot of these things. It'd probably be good for them if some of that did leak out. But we know they're going to be aggressive with some of these positions, especially corner.
Yeah, I know corners. I think it's fair to say corner is very high need for them on their need boards this spring going into the summer, and I think they're gonna push to address it. I think you can see multiple guys in that conversation, and defensive line too. Those are the top 2 needs. I think you're looking at 2-1, maybe a second defensive lineman if you can move with it, and then receiver, a speed, or really. We talked about speed, and I think another way to look at it, maybe an experienced guy outside. I think you look at what they've got. Malik Elsey's a sophomore. Alex Kapka-Jones doesn't have that playing time. Colin Dixon's a redshirt freshman. I think you would, in an ideal world, like to add a guy who's been around college football for 3 years, who can kind of knows how to elevate that receiver room in a way that it probably needs elevated. So we talked a lot about speed, but I think experience matters there too.
You need somebody who can raise the floor.
Yes.
Right? Because I think that receiver room has intriguing upside, but I think the floor could be pretty low if like Malik Elsey struggles with his hands, which we've seen in the fall and in the spring. If Ashton Hollins just proves he's not physically quite ready yet, strength-wise, if Colin Dixon just needs experience, right? Like Mario Sanders has not competed at this level. Like Kanari Wilcher, I think is going to play a big role, but we haven't seen it on the field. So while I'm excited about that talent, just to raise the floor of a guy you could put into a rotation, potentially put in a starting lineup and say, okay, I know this guy is going to be productive in his opportunities. I think that would be a big addition.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of value in that to, as you mentioned, help raise that floor and give you a little bit more margin for error. We say that, and I still believe it's third on the list of needs, behind cornerback, behind defensive line, and then fourth on that list of needs would be offensive line. So we'll see what that looks like in terms of. You're right. They move quietly. A lot of transfers really move a little more quietly than high school guys. Some don't. Some move very, very loudly. Illinois, though, kind of the way we've observed it, has been a little bit kept things a little closer to the vest in that front. So we'll see if it probably would behoove them to have a name or so, a kid tweet out Illinois offered, or whatever the case is, to give people a list. Because as we talked about with basketball's been 2 weeks. People are starting to get a little antsy, and I think football is very, very much in the same conversation. And then you factor in losing a guy like Calvin Smith, who I think is a bigger loss maybe than we talked about the last time. Zach Toby, Anthony Johnson, now AJ Dennis.
I think you need a starting level corner, you need a rotational defensive lineman, and you need at least a guy in the wide receiver that can rotate in. And it'd be nice if it could be a starter, but I think corner has got to be the marquee position. All right, let's go to Illini women's basketball here, Joey. Is they are adding right now. They add 2 transfers over the weekend. I'm going to Tenin Magassa. I should have looked at Tenin Magassa and Jasmine Brown-Haggar. Tell me about Magassa, 6'5" center, one of the best shot blockers in the country, comes from Rhode Island. Why is this a significant addition for Illini women's basketball?
Well, we talked to Shauna Green on this pod earlier this month. She had talked about the need for a shot blocking presence in the post. No slight to Camille Hobby. Camille Hobby did a lot of good things for Illinois offensively. I think to get a shot blocker like Magassa, who she averaged 2 block shots a game. I think she was 5th all time when she transferred from Dayton, which she was with this coaching staff at Dayton. It just fits what they need, what they were looking for. You pair her with Kendall Bostic and the returning Adalia McKenzie, Makaira Cook, who Magassa raved about all the story on the Illini Inquirer on Tuesday morning. I caught up with her. She raved about being teammates with Makaira Cook and what playing with the guard of her abilities can do for Magassa's game and to be able to round out this roster. And Genesis Bryan, I just think it was a fit that Illinois needed. I wouldn't be surprised to see them still in the market for another post player because we know Haven Smith is somebody who might take a little bit more time to develop as a true freshman. But that's was the big need Shauna Green talked to us about on the podcast, was a post player, and they went out and they got one that they're really, really familiar with. And I think that connection, I know that connection that they had with her back at Dayton helped this second time around in the portal, getting hot down the stretch like they did. Magassa entered the portal in the middle of March, so she was able to see that run where Illinois had kind of figured it out a little bit, went on to win the WBIT. I think that was appealing for her, and she believes in this culture and believes in the program that Shauna Green has, and to have somebody else as a salesperson in your program for what they do, I think there's a lot of value there.
A few things. I think it's significant that she was part of Dayton and she knows Micaiah Cook and Bryn Shoup-Hill and the staff. It should be a seamless transition. She knows what to expect, which I think is great. 2 blocks a game. I think she was 5th in the country in block rate based on the minutes she was playing. It's a different kind of big than Camille Hobby. Gassa seems a little bit more athletic, get up and down the court a little bit quicker, but just a bigger defensive presence. Rebounding wise, pretty good for her size, but it's just a different kind of rim protection that Illinois hasn't had. But I agree with you. I think they need to add another big, maybe someone more like Hobby. You can run some offense through a bigger body, but just somebody a little bit different, because if you can get another rotational big, all of a sudden, I think the first year they were here, Shauna Green was here, like Illinois was just exploited in the post, right? Like, but if you can add Magassa, another big, and then have, Shea Bolin off the bench, Bryn Shoup-Hill off the bench, obviously Kendall Bostic can play small ball 5, but really played the 4 extremely well. Like, Joey, that's a Big Ten front court all of a sudden. And Barry Wallace on the wing, that's 6 foot plus. Adalia McKenzie, a big guard. We'll get into Brown-Haggar here in a minute. And you got these playmaking guards. Gretchen Dolan, I'll add to that. But, of course, Micaiah Cook and who am I thinking of? Other guard.
Genesis Bryant.
Like, just real good playmakers there. Sorry, I had a brain fart there. But, like, this is a legit Big Ten roster that I think you can start thinking of as, can this be like a 6 or a 7 seed in the NCAA tournament? Like, that's why these additions are nice on top of the returners. But haven't talked about Jasmine Brown-Haggar yet. Top 60 recruit in the class of 2023, 1 year at Mississippi State. Why was she a priority for Illinois? What does she bring, Joey?
Being back in the in-state prospect, like, that's a big deal. She was one of the few uncommitted prospects in the state, especially in that kind of top tier level prospect, when this coaching staff got to Champaign, and they went out and they made a push for her, and they really, really tried to land her. Thought they did a good job in that recruitment. Obviously, she went to Mississippi State, and you can't fault her. At that point in time, you were fighting against the past at Illinois in terms of the sell you had, even though they had their date and sell. So when she goes in the portal, to get her to come back the second time around, I think it tells you a lot about where this program has come from and where a lot of people think that it can go or is going. So that just to know your in-state pitch is improving from the time you walked in the door to now, that's a really, really big deal. She's a guard who you bring back a Micaiah Cook and a Genesis Bryant next year, and like, you expect those two to be a really, really big part of what you're going to do. But to have her be able to give them some spot minutes, I mean, we kind of talked a little bit about guard depth a year ago, and it still felt like those two played a ton of minutes. So just to be able to, hopefully in an ideal world, let them get a little bit of a breather. You don't have to rely so heavily on those two to do so much of the heavy lifting in terms of minutes. That's a big deal. And she can be a bridge. Like, they are very, very actively recruiting. They're in on some 26 or 25 kids, Shauna Green has told us on this pod, man, Shauna's on here a lot. That's been good for us. That's a big recruiting class, because you lose all of these COVID kids. That's such a big deal. They're back now. You've got a lot of minutes to sell. So to have a player like Jasmine Brown-Haggar who can kind of help bridge into that as it comes, not this coming season, but the following, like that's a big deal for Illinois.
I love this addition, because you're going to lose Cook and Bryant and McKenzie in that backcourt after this year. And this is somebody that can step into a starting role along with Gretchen Dolan, along with whatever freshman you add. But even in the short term, Joey, you've had a very small backcourt. So you can have, like, if you need a defensive stopper to come in for a couple minutes to sub out for Bryant, if you're getting beat by some bigger guards, you can put Brown-Haggar in there with McKenzie. Now those guys got to prove themselves a little bit more shooters, but like, you have another option defensively. And if McKenzie doesn't have it that night, she's kind of the defensive stopper in that backcourt. Brown-Haggar is another option. So the depth of that is so important for the short term, but the potential starter ability of a top 60 recruit coming in behind Cook and Bryant, I think it's a perfect bridge. So I really, really like that addition. So one post, they got 3 scholarships open. 15 scholarships for women's basketball. A lot of times those aren't always filled, but one more post. Do they add anything else here, Joey?
I could see him maybe still in the guard market. Again, like you've got some long-term pieces, knowing what's going out that door, and you're still in deep in some really good 25 players, but you got to close on those. So I think another longer-term guard would, like a Cameron Rhodes who entered the transfer portal, like someone kind of in that mold would be something that I think you could see them adding this offseason.
All right, let's go talk about the NFL draft. I will not speak about my Bears. I will not focus on that, as hard as that is to do, because it was so much fun. But
you guys did something? What happened there?
We did some things. You guys had
I hate it. I hate it. Just let's go. Keep it moving.
How much did you hate the Falcons taking Michael Penix Jr.?
I didn't understand it. Like it's fine. Do what you're going to do. It didn't make any sense. I hated the Bears crushing their first 2 picks way more than I hated anything else.
We'll see. Hopefully it all works out for once. It was hard to screw up that, Caleb Williams, number 1, and Rome Odunze, number 9. And also Torrey Taylor. I'm so excited to add him in the 4th round. I get the conversation of, should you draft a punter in the 4th round? I don't care. It's fun, and he's really, really good. We saw it for years, Joey.
He is really, I just got to a wedding in Indiana, and I looked at my phone. I saw they took him. I thought, you got to be kidding me. And I thought, I'm saying this about a punter? This is rough shape. NFC North all the way back.
Best division of football. Here we go. I'm going to feel so good about this 3rd place finish in the NFC North.
Look at you clapping. You're so excited.
You might be in the playoffs as a 3rd team in the NFC North. We'll see. We need the quarterback to hit, of course. A lot is riding on this. But let's talk about the Illini that got drafted. Joey, you were in Orlando as Johnny Newton got drafted, but later than we expected. He goes number 36 overall to the Washington Commanders of all teams. We'll talk about that fit here in a second. But what was that like on I'm sure, a disappointing night 1, but he didn't have to wait that long on Friday night to get picked. So set the scene of what you saw and what that was like.
Yeah, I think you could kind of feel it getting a little bit anxious. And you really, if you look at how that first half of the first round played out with so many quarterbacks, so many offensive players, you kind of thought like, oh, wow, either there's going to be a run of defensive players or he might end up slipping into that second round, which is what he did. I know Houston tried to move up to get him. They were unable to find a deal. They would have come up in the first round to get him. It sounds like that didn't happen. And look, Johnny Newton. Johnny Newton is as confident in Johnny Newton as anybody on the planet is. And he believes, and I think a lot of people believe, he's a first-round talent. And to not have that go, I think there was a level of he was really, how do I want to, he got it. When I talked to him, he's like, you always expect the unexpected. His dad said, once we saw those quarterbacks go like that, we kind of knew, okay, this might be a round 2 thing. And then really when Detroit moved up for that 32nd overall pick, right before they were on the clock, he put his phone in his pocket, and it's like, okay, that's it. That's it for tonight. He went off and talked with his family and talked with his agent. It's Johnny Newton. You knew he was going to be disappointed because he believes in himself as much as he did. But I think he also knew, this is not going to be a long Friday.
Yeah.
This is going to be something that happened very quickly. I think a lot of people in the room knew it was going to happen very quickly. I don't know that Washington was I thought the Titans were a team to really watch there. There was another – I know I texted you, Jeremy, about another – Patriots, I think, were a team to monitor there. And he ended up in Washington. We can talk about that fit, but – For as long as Thursday night must have felt, Friday he went to some family's house. They grilled out. They watched movies. He was able to kind of decompress, get away from it. Family's really, really important to him. And he seemed like he was in a pretty good mood on Friday. And obviously, you are going to be in a good mood when you get drafted and you got a couple million sitting on the other side of his signature. But I think he understood it. And he'll hit free agency a year earlier, which is not for nothing.
I was telling the Rymans on Friday night after we went, I go, the silver lining of all of this is that he could hit free agency. Man, your boy just hacking away with the weed hacker there.
I don't even think we have any weeds out.
But I told them, I said, he hits free agency a year early. And if we know Johnny Newton is, as long as that foot stays healthy, and maybe that was an issue for teams, he wasn't able to work out for every team, but he did work out at his pro day. But yeah, once those quarterbacks and that run of offensive linemen went, it just pushed all these defensive linemen down the board. And once Murphy went, I go, okay, Johnny could go in the next, 10, 15 picks here, but they had the edges go, and you had Chop Robinson go to Miami. And that's when I started thinking, man, and Quinyon Mitchell is the 22nd pick. That guy was a top 15 type talent. And then Darius Robinson going to Arizona. I thought that was maybe his best spot. And Darius Robinson was not as good of a college football player as Johnny Newton. Barely any of these defenders were as good of a college football player, but he's the perfect 4-eye guy. In their 3-4 defense, it was more about ceiling potential. That's what a lot of this stuff is. And then the wide receiver run at the very end of the round, the Chiefs going with Worthy, and Niners going with Pearsall, Panthers trading up to get Leggett. It just kind of pushed everything down. And I couldn't believe the Falcons in the second round taking Rook Arororo over Johnny Newton. Like, I get he's a Clemson defensive lineman, but Johnny Newton was the best interior defensive lineman in college football the last 2 years. And Washington Commanders GM Adam Peters told the media in Washington, I couldn't believe he was there. They had no need for Johnny Newton. They have no need for Johnny Newton. They have Jonathan Allen on their defensive line, Jaron Payne on their defensive line. They took a second rounder on the defensive line a couple of years ago. But he said, this guy was a first round talent on our board, and he was by far the best player on our board. We couldn't pass him up. So in the middle of a rebuild, or the start of a rebuild, Peters just couldn't believe he was there. And I think all of us agree with him. But I don't love the fit for him right away, because Allen's there, Payne's there. They're two of the highest paid players in the team. They're both locked up to long-term deals. So he's going to be more of a rotational guy. So I don't love that for him, but he is in a Dan Quinn defense. I wonder if they get, a little bit creative in getting him on the field, but he will play. He will be in that rotation right away, but he's not going to be a starter on that team.
No, I know Adam Peters mentioned the 49ers, and it feels like San Francisco has, Jeremy, we've seen it, right? It feels like they've got 1,000 defensive linemen. They just rotate in, and they're all fresh, and they all make make other teams' life terrible. And like, if you're trying to find a good thing for Johnny Newton with those two guys in front of him, it's like, I expect him to rotate, and I expect him to get there and put himself in a position to be in a conversation to be rotated. The other silver lining is pretty much universally on Friday night, Saturday morning, whenever you consume day 2 draft content, steal of the draft was all, because really between two guys who were probably should have been taken in the first round, it was Johnny Newton and Cooper DeJean.
Yeah.
Like, those two guys were all, you can go around a lot, and those two were the steals. So I guess if you're looking for that as an Illinois fan to say, oh, well, everyone got it. Everyone agreed he should have been in the first round, and he just wasn't. But yeah, the fit will be interesting there. But I do like Washington saying, okay, no, like, best player available, doesn't matter. We'll figure it out from here.
Isaiah Adams goes 71 to the Arizona Cardinals, and I felt so good for him for it. This is a guy that probably would have been a 4th rounder last year, maybe 3rd rounder. Like, there was a thought he could do that because he was so dominant in his 1 year at the Big Ten, but probably had to prove more, had to do a little bit more. And he started off well at guard. Like, his first 2 games at left guard were really good. And then he had to sacrifice for the team and move out to right tackle. We know that didn't work out very well, at least for the first 4 games. I thought he really settled in and played well at the end of the season, as I thought the whole offensive line got way better in the back half of the season. I think that proved out in how Illinois played. But I didn't want him to come back and like hurt his draft stock. And it didn't. People went back to the film. They saw what he did at guard. I think Brett Bielema played a big role in that. And Monty Ossenfort talked about how he loves Brett Bielema players. Like, he's got a good relationship with Brett Bielema, and that he sung his praises. And then kudos to Isaiah Adams. He killed it at the Senior Bowl. Just absolutely crushed it, especially in the one-on-one drills, played well in the game. So the fact that he goes 71, which, unlike Newton, I think this is the best possible scenario, is Lonte knows Arizona probably the worst offensive line in the NFL last year. And I think he can step in and be a day 1 starter on the offensive line at guard. So I loved the fit for Isaiah Adams here at 71.
Yeah, I'm with you. And Isaiah Adams is a guy that we talked about, I think, on the pre-draft pod. He kicked out to tackle. We expect him to kick in and give some center versatility in Arizona. And he's a guy who I know that they're going to say, hey, learn center. If that's the case, he's going to learn how to be a center in an emergency situation. So that versatility, that take one for the team to right tackle thing. I don't think that hurt him like it really could have hurt him. He's a guy who, interestingly enough, the combine, total opposite of the next guy we're going to talk about. You didn't really look at his stuff and say, oh my gosh, but the film, it's very, very different, right? Like combine was very run of the mill for Isaiah Adams. The film was not. The film, he was a very physical, mean. He's tougher than hell. I think that showed up in the games he played and his ability to kick out to right tackle. I do. I like the fit for him. I think he's going to get a chance to go in there and make an impact right away. I was happy for him, as you alluded to, Jeremy, that kind of taking one and going to right tackle didn't hurt him in the big picture. Like that, you would have felt bad for him. And he knew, Isaiah Adams is a competitor. He knew those first few weeks at right tackle weren't great. He wasn't going to sit there and lie to us, but he figured it out. I think there's a lot to be said if you're an NFL team looking at a guy who you might want to take some snaps at center for figuring out a position that wasn't natural to him. And that probably – it definitely didn't hurt him, and maybe you could spin it to help them a little bit in the long run.
I got to be honest with you. Of the two of us that booked 2-day stays at the spots we were at, I did not know that you would be the one that needed it. Because Tip Ryman was kind enough to, him and his family, just as the Newtons were. We can't say thank you enough to those families for allowing us to be part of that day and those players for allowing us to be part of that day. But Tip and his family said, hey, we're going to do something Friday night. We got something planned for Saturday as well. And I said, I'll probably stay through Saturday at Rapid City, South Dakota. I just, Tip I've covered for a long time here and, saw him work out at the camp where Rod Smith invited him to, but I just didn't think he'd be a 3rd-round draft pick after all of this. But Tip Ryman continues to surprise us, man. And for the 2nd round, the family was loose. No one's really paying attention. They're just kind of checking in. They're eating their brisket, which was phenomenal, by the way. But at the beginning of the 3rd round, Tip found a spot on the couch next to his wife, next to his family, and he was ready to get drafted. You can tell he was like, this is my time at the beginning of the 3rd round. And there was some buzz I think he was getting from his agent that the Chargers could be one to watch at pick 69. And they ended up taking Junior Colson, which is not a surprise. A Michigan coach taking the Michigan player. But you could tell that all of a sudden there was just oh, man, we might be waiting a while. Man, this maybe goes into the 4th round. And then there's a little bit of a reprieve when Isaiah Adams gets drafted. And then Tip had his phone on super loud and the room was quiet. You could tell there's just a lot of anxiety in the room. And then his phone just goes, boom, and his dad flipped out. And all of a sudden it was oh my God, he's getting drafted. And you could hear on the other line, because the room is so quiet, it's Monty Ossenfort from the Arizona Cardinals. We're drafting you. And it was unbelievable moment. Tip Hulk smashed a water bottle. I think people have seen that video. But what about this kid is unbelievable. Was 6'5", 210 pounds when he worked out for Illinois, gets a walk-on spot, passes up FCS offers, passes up all these players on the Illinois roster. Plays as a true freshman walk-on, becomes a starter, passes up Luke Ford, a former 4-star recruit, top 100 player, becomes a starting tight end, doesn't put up huge numbers, but crushes the combine, 6'5", 270, runs a 4.63. He told me he ran a sub 4.5 working out at one point, Joey. He's just an unbelievable story of will, of committing to a process fully. This guy did not skip a day, eats everything right, has a training plan, all of it. It's just, he was rewarded for all of that work. And it's obviously he's got some natural talent, but he put in absolute work for 3.5, 4 years at Illinois, but even beyond that, before he even got there to get to this point. It's an unbelievable story that Tip Ryman was the 82nd pick in the draft.
Yeah, I know it's covered in your story, and I know we even really, and just kind of talking around Champaign, where Tip had always been all right, 3 years or 4 years, I guess, and I'm done. I'm out of there.
Okay, kid.
Yeah, all right, buddy. Good for you. Good luck with that one. And even a year ago at this time, if you would have been hey, Tip's not coming back, I would have said probably undrafted. I didn't think he was going to test like he did. Undrafted free agent would have felt right. And credit to him for working, as he would say in your story, and it makes me laugh really, really hard every time, working his buns off.
Yep.
Tip Ryman getting a little –
the spiciest I heard him is he said after he got judged, he's what the crap? He was so excited. He said, what the crap? I was that's good for him. As R-rated as you will get Tip Ryman.
Good for him. But yeah, come on. If you would have told me if you would have said in 2021 hey, you're going to be at a draft party for an Illinois tight end in 2 years. Are you picking Tip Ryman?
No.
You're picking Luke Ford. You were picking Luke Ford. At that moment in time, you would have taken Luke Ford. And then it's just built and slowly built and slowly built. And Tip Ryman gets bigger and bigger. As you mentioned, passes Luke Ford. Could they have used him differently last year? Yeah, maybe. I don't know that you would get a lot of pushback on that. The guy got drafted in the 3rd round, though. So ultimately, that's the big rebuttal to come back. But man, what a story for that guy to find his way into a 3rd round draft pick. No one would have believed it, Jeremy. Literally nobody would have believed it as recently as 2 months ago.
And I'll give Tip this. Like, his hands got better this year. He didn't drop a pass this year. The year before, he dropped some passes. He had to come back and prove that, and he did. I thought he could have been targeted a little bit more. But at the same time, Casey Washington got drafted. We'll talk about that here in a second. Isaiah Williams has an NFL contract, was an all Big Ten first-team player. Pat Bryant had 7 touchdowns, had a really good season. Illinois was still top 3 in the Big Ten in passing yards per game. So it's not like their passing attack wasn't good enough and they needed help blocking. Like, because of that tackle situation, Tip Ryman had to help blocking. Would have liked to get him a couple more targets, especially those dump offs. Like, he's got that athleticism. He can make plays after the catch a little bit. But this makes a lot. I love the fit, Joey, because Trey McBride's a great receiving tight end. And now Tip Ryman's that complimentary Y, inline, hand on the ground, tight end that can contribute on special teams. He'll be a stud there. And you're going to get the most out of Tip Ryman. If we've learned anything throughout this, is he's a safe pick because you're going to get the most out of him. He's going to continue to get better. And there is untapped potential because he's just a 4-year player. Like, he's not a 5 or 6 year COVID guy. He was at Illinois for 3.5 years. And he told his parents that when they dropped him off as a freshman in the middle of the pandemic, I'm going to graduate in 3.5 years, go to the NFL. And they're like, sure. Yeah. Like, hey, they're supportive of it, of course. But dude, that guy's had conviction when maybe no one else did. He had conviction. So kudos to him for that. And speaking of another one, we got to feel great about. If you had told me before the season, after the season, Casey Washington would be the receiver drafted out of that Illinois wide receiver group, I would have thought you were crazy. But here we are. Casey Washington crushes the pre-draft process, gets picked in the 6th round by the Atlanta Falcons. They're going to have a good passing attack no matter who that quarterback is. They got some weapons there, but they need some depth. And Casey Washington didn't play special teams at Illinois very much because he was a starting receiver, but I think he'll be a stud there. I think that's where he'll make the roster spot. And I think we've seen Casey really grow these last couple of years. And he grew a lot towards the end of the season in confidence and his ability to make plays after the catch and run away from people. I didn't know he had that in him, what he showed in the Northwestern game, but he backed it up in the pre-draft process with a 39-inch vertical, 4.53 40-yard dash. That's NFL numbers, and we know he can go up and get contested catches.
I don't feel bad saying this now. I don't remember feeling as happy for someone getting drafted as I did for Casey Washington because it was out of nowhere. It would have been out of nowhere in October, early November. Like, it flat out, he was a good player. He didn't have a
touchdown catch until November, mid-November. Was his first touchdown catch? It was the third to last game. Was his first touchdown catch?
It was at home. I remember talking to his dad. It would have been Indiana.
Yeah.
It was Indiana, yeah. You wouldn't have believed it in the beginning of November. If you would have told me November 1st, I remember calling him after his pro day, or after the pro day rather, and he had a great day. He had a great pro day. Like, that pro day would have stacked up at the combine. And he said, I feel like I proved I belong. And in my mind, I'm still thinking, yeah, but you don't have the production that still lacks over the course of his career. And I wondered if that production was going to catch up to the numbers.
Yeah. Can I weigh in just a second? Because he ended with 670 receiving yards, right? Like, that's real production at the Big Ten level. 375 of those were over his last 3 games. His all 4 career touchdowns were in his last 3 games, 22 receptions in his last 3 games. Like, so until his final 3 games, the production wasn't there of an NFL player. So we kept hearing from Bielema, I keep telling the NFL about this guy, but at some point you had to see it on the field. And it's like, finally the last 3 games and then the pro day. And you're like, oh, maybe he was right.
We had heard someone around Johnny's pro day, which was very close to the draft, said, hey, don't be surprised if he goes in the 5th round, Casey Washington. I'm like, Yeah, all right. Okay. And then he goes in the 6th round. I mean, it's just for as much perseverance as we've talked about with Tip Ryman, Casey Washington is there too. He played in like a wing offense in high school, overlooked by virtually every single team. Credit to Andrew Haystoker for getting him out of Pflugerville. Comes in. I still remember that rookie camp. I know we talk about it a lot. He stays after, not rookie camp, I'm sorry, the training camp his freshman year. He stays after. He's making these just stupid catches. And you're like, hey, that's fun to watch. I don't know what to expect of you, but that's pretty cool. And he just continued to kind of be there. He briefly left for Wake Forest. And Brett Bielema made him earn it coming back. And he didn't have to do that, right? And he sat in there and he earned that. He wowed them. Even when talking to the coaches and coming back from Wake Forest, he wowed them with his maturity. He wasn't a team captain last year. In my mind, he was. Yeah. His voice mattered so much in that locker room that I don't know that a lot of people really fully grasp how much his voice mattered, even though he wasn't a captain. He led in a lot of different ways in there. And I think that translated into the pre-draft process for him. And he got teams to believe in him because he believed in him. And you're right. You saw that belief start to really manifest and show up on the field late. He's a guy, we've talked to people. It's like, I don't know. Even at that point, we didn't know if he was going to get drafted, but he was going to stick around.
Yep.
So Casey Washington was going to get in the NFL one way or the other. He was going to stick around for a couple of years because that's what Casey Washington does. He finds a way to make himself valuable to the team that he's on. And special teams is probably going to be that avenue early on for him. But, man, what an awesome story for that kid. What an awesome, awesome story.
Wasn't a great weekend for all the Illini, of course. Isaiah Williams does not get drafted. He signs with the Detroit Lions. According to reports, $250,000 base guarantee salary. That's pretty good. That's like a late-round pick. Keith Randolph signs with the Bears. I saw a report, $200,000 base salary guarantee, so I think he'll have a chance to make the roster. Denzel Jackson to the Cowboys. John Paddock to the Falcons. I think it's notable, Joey, 3 straight quarterbacks have earned an NFL paycheck at Illinois. Brandon Peters, he only was in a rookie camp, but at least had a cup of coffee. And then we know what Tommy DeVito did last year, becoming a folk hero in New Jersey. And then now Paddock gets a shot, at least early here with the Falcons. And then Tariq Barnes with the Houston Texans. I saw that was $80,000, according to Aaron Wilson, that was reported, guarantee there. So I think Tariq Barnes will have a chance to be a special teamer there in the NFL. But which guy surprised you most of not getting drafted? I think we'd go between Keith Randolph and Isaiah Williams here, but Julian Pearl did not get drafted. I have not yet seen him sign a deal yet. I haven't seen a report yet as of Monday afternoon here. So which one surprised you more there?
Keith Randolph. I thought Keith Randolph thought teams would understand the injury and kind of the way that he played banged up, and they would still believe in his size, his athleticism, the production he still had at Illinois. I mean, he was still a productive player at that position. I know Isaiah Williams was the first team All-Big Ten guy. I know Isaiah Williams had 1,000 receiving yards. I think you could look and say, well, he didn't run the best. He's not very tall. Like, he had the fumbles on punt return. Like, I could have made a case for him to go undrafted before I made that case.
Especially in a wide receiver draft. This was a
absolutely
good wide receiver draft, yeah.
Absolutely. But now I say that, and I think both those guys landed in a spot that they're going to be able to hang around. But I would probably put the edge towards Keith, even though I don't know that it's a huge gap between the two in terms of my surprises.
I'm with you. I love the spots. Isaiah's got some comfort with Jameson Williams. It's like one of his best friends growing up. So he's in the same wide receiver room with him. Kirby Joseph obviously is there, his former teammate. So I like the fit because they have stars. Like Armand St. Brown is a star in the slot. I don't see Isaiah Williams unseating him as he's now one of the top wide receivers that's getting paid in the NFL. And Jameson Williams is kind of a speed threat, right? So I think he's going to have to earn a spot as a punt returner, which he's got to show a little bit more there. But there are other guys in that rotation are getting kind of old. Khalif Reiman was kind of their top punt returner. He's 29. He's getting more expensive here as he gets older. They lost Josh Reynolds in free agency. So I like the idea of him playing indoors with Jared Goff, gets rid of the ball quickly. And the one thing about Isaiah, who does lack that true top-end speed, long speed, he gets open. He gets open against this competition. So these short routes in this kind of offense with Ben Johnson, I think he can find a way. It's not going to be easy for him. I think he's going to have to be able to be a returner. I love Keith Randolph's spot. The Bears did not draft an interior defensive lineman. They need a fourth interior defensive lineman next to Gravon Dexter, Zach Pickens, and Andrew Billings. And while it's not a for sure thing to be Keith Randolph, there's a roster spot available as a fourth interior defensive lineman for the Bears. And I think he's a fifth, sixth, seventh round talent. And the Bears got him for an undrafted free agent. So I like that spot for him to compete for a roster spot.
Yeah, I'm absolutely with you on all those things. Just one more point about Isaiah. He's a guy I think is also going to figure out what he needs to do. Like we talked about with Casey Washington, just because I'm with you, I think Keith Randolph does have a pretty clear path to a roster spot. Isaiah Williams, I think he's going to figure out a way. And then I'll be curious to see the other guys, right? I'll be curious to see, I think the next guy who I would maybe put on kind of that tier of could make it would be Denzel Daxon. John Paddock. That's fine. I mean, he's right there, and I think John Paddock would be kind of that last, like, what a fun story. Let's see if he can make a little noise here. But I really like that spot for Keith Randolph.
Yeah, Paddock's going into a quarterback room that includes $100 million Kirk Cousins, number 8 pick Michael Penix Jr., and Taylor Heineke, who started games.
And I'm assuming Elmo with the fire gift as they sort out what in the world they're trying to do.
How they figure that all out. Denzel Daxon, like they just drafted Mozzie Smith last year at that nose tackle position. They got some veterans there. I do like Tariq Barnes' path to a roster spot because he's fast. He ran a 4.53. You know he's going to play special teams. He did that a lot in his career at Illinois. He's got some explosiveness. He could play multiple linebacker positions. My problem is he's on a team with 2 former Illini who are doing the exact same thing, Jake Hansen and Delshon Phillips. So that's the hard part is maybe not this team, but these guys at least will have a chance to showcase themselves to not only the teams they'll be with in training camp or rookie camp, but the rest of the NFL and all of that. So another successful draft for Illinois. I mean, 11 guys in the last 3 years. That ranks, I think, tied for 4th in the Big Ten, or it is 4th most in the Big Ten West over the last 3 years. So it has been a successful draft. You just would have liked to have won more games with that, Joey. You would have liked to have made more bowl appearances with that. And now we'll see if Brett Bielema can develop more of his own recruits, because 10 of these 11 guys, of course, were recruited by Lovie Smith. The only one that wasn't is Isaiah Adams. It's still very early, right? Like those prep prospects have not really fully developed yet. But now it's time for those guys to develop into NFL prospects. And it'll be interesting to see what that is, because if they want to win games in this Big Ten with all these Pac-12 teams that have all these draft picks coming in, you're going to need to develop more of that top-end talent. That's going to be a big part of this season.
Yeah, I know. And I also want to make one more point. Like, everyone can say these are Lovie's guys. They were. Credit to Lovie Smith for that. Absolutely. Most of Brett Bielema's guys aren't even draft eligible. So let's just slow down.
Well, here's the thing. Like, Lovie got them here, which is big. Brett's the one who coached them, right? Like, Brett coached these guys almost their entire career. So they both get credit. They both absolutely get credit for this. Lovie bringing in talent. I kept saying throughout his tenure, he's bringing in Power 5 traits, and people got sick and tired of me saying that. But he did. He found guys with length, with speed, and you have to develop them, get the most out of them. I would argue he did not do that during his tenure here, because I just don't think his staff was quite good enough. I think Brett Bielema has hired, for the most part, really good coaches. I think Brett is this football 101. These guys are pretty intelligent football players. Now, it hasn't come all together for outside of the 2022 season for a winning season, but he is doing a good job of developing the individual talent. They just need more of it. They need more depth of it. And we'll see. It's going to really define his tenure, right? Is the next 2-3 years of what he's able to get out of these guys.
Yeah, look, to be clear, none of us are saying, don't sweat the wins and losses. They've got 11 draft picks. No one's saying that. No one in the Smith Center is going to say that either. Like, they need to win more games.
I know
they need to win more football games. Yes, absolutely. But, I mean, I think you can say that and recognize that, then also recognize, like, man, these guys are developing these. Like, those two things can still exist at the same time. The development and the NFL success, and still realizing you left wins out on the field.
They have missed opportunities for more wins, right? But they also are way more competitive game in and game out than they were under the previous staff. They're winning more games, even though it's not quite enough to get to a consistent bowl games. They're also developing draft picks. Like, there are small steps forward. They have not gotten over the hump, right? Like, they have not made it to the Wisconsin-Iowa level. They have not gotten there quite yet. And that's why these next couple of years of his own prep recruits, his transfer recruits are really important, because next year's potential draftees.
Let's go over it. I was going to bring that up.
Yeah, like Seth Coleman has got to be near the top of that list. I think JC Davis can be near the top of that list. But Pat Bryant is a potential guy that is worth watching if he can be one of the best players in the Big Ten. I think Zy Chrysler, I know some fans might roll their eyes. He's got the talent to do it. He's got the staff. And Illinois and Brett Bielema have the reputation with offensive linemen that those guys can be NFL players. And I think we can bring up, we got to see it from Dennis Briggs and Gabe Akis, but I think Gabe Akis would have to have a monster year to be an early entry, but we know he's got the talent. But there's not as many guys that, because it's a small senior class, that I'm like, yeah, those are guys are given draft picks. So we knew coming into this year, Johnny Newton and Isaiah Adams would likely be draft picks. I thought Isaiah Williams and Keith Randolph would likely be draft picks too.
Yeah, I think it's my understanding the NFL is high on Seth Coleman. I think Seth Coleman needs to be more consistent. The flashes, the games, we've seen him put together 3-4 straight games where you're like, this is everything you thought he was going to be with his length and his athleticism and his speed and his ability to put all that together. Needs to be more consistent. I think that's kind of the big story of Seth Coleman's year. Pat Bryant's a guy that I'm fascinated with. I'm endlessly fascinated to see what kind of step he can take to put himself there, because he looks like a guy who could play in the NFL. He's long. Does he have that top end speed? No.
That's my question.
But again, he's also somebody who's got to be consistent, and I think that'll come. I don't have a lot of worries. I know he had some kind of key drops last year. I don't have a lot of worries about his consistency this year. I am more worried about his speed being that thing that we're talking about a year from now.
Through his junior year, he's way more productive than Casey Washington, but he's got similarities physically wise. He's a great blocker. I think he contributed on special teams if he needed to, goes up and gets it over people. To me, he's shown more play speed than Casey Washington. I don't know if he's actually faster time-wise, but like on the field, like he gets over the top of people more often, or at least finds a way to get more separation than Casey got. Casey was a better, more consistent, like that ball is up in the air. It's probably 80-20 for Casey. I mean, some of the big catches he made were ridiculous. Like Pat can still take another level there, but I think he will. So I don't know if he's like a day 2 quality guy, but
right.
I think he's definitely a guy that'll be on boards.
And then I think JC Davis. They are very excited about JC Davis and what he's shown since he got on campus. And he was a guy who was on some back end of draft boards this cycle. Illinois' reputation, the ability to put that tape up in the Big Ten. I think he's a guy. Like, again, it's going to be smaller because there's not as many seniors. I think Gabe Akis is a guy, he'd have to have a big year. And if he does, that's great for Illinois. But I think we're talking about him another draft from there. But yeah, I mean, I think it's a pretty clear 3 or 4 guys who are going to be in that conversation a year. Now, I'm not saying they all get drafted, but if you had to ask me today, which ones, are we going to be talking about a year from now? Those are the pool of 4 I'm picking from.
Yeah, and then if you're talking like 2 years from now, like Akis, we'll see if Altmaier gets to that level. I think he's got some natural talent. Cole Rusk could be one to watch just because of his talent level, his ability to catch the ball. And I would put a guy like Xavier Scott into that conversation at some point. Like he's going to have to show it again this year. And I know he's a little smaller, but Mike Sanders still, like I can see him kind of following that path of that kind of player. And with more nickels in the NFL, like more NFL defenses going with the nickel, I think there's more of an open spot. I think we covered it all, Joey. You got anything else to add? I'm ready to get out.
I know we kind of, yeah, me too. I'm trying to get some dinner ready here. I'm eating like a normal person again, Jeremy, now that we're not on the road. I didn't have the Ryman brisket, and I didn't see you bring a Tupperware back for the rest of us.
Sure. Yeah.
Just one quick point. I know we belabored it a lot, and maybe people don't. Being in those moments is as good as anything we feel professionally. Just to be there, to be able to see that, to know that we've done our job in a way that's honest, accurate, respectful. You've built connections. You've cared enough about these guys to know their story, to what makes that day so special, to know that I could ask Johnny's dad about working out on the side of a automotive shop in St. Pete and understand how that moment got to this one. Like, there's no greater feeling professionally than to know that we've done it right and they trust us to tell their stories. And to see, Jeremy, you talked to Johnny Newton, a huge story when he was 18 years old.
Yeah.
And to see that come to fruition now, to see Tip Ryman, I showed the picture you sent me of baby Tip to some people in Orlando. I'm like, oh my gosh, like it's to see that transformation. There's just no better feeling professionally. And I just want everyone to know how grateful we are that they subscribe to us and allow us to go to those things financially, whether as indirectly as it may feel, and then to the families for opening their doors for something they don't have to. Like the Newtons on Friday could have told me to get lost. They could have said, hey, we're doing a small thing. Last night was not how we thought it was going to go. Thanks for coming, but good luck with you. And they didn't, and they let us come back. And like that means so much.
Yeah, the Rymans opened up their house to me. It was unbelievable. The Browns did it last year. I know you've done it with other guys as well, Fadarian Lowe, just with his family. Like it's just you and his family.
It's literally just me, a video guy, and his family, and like it's the best.
It's awesome because I hope people know. Like I understand most people, they just want to know about the transactional nature of this. Like who's coming, what, like what's the latest on this? What are they producing? And I don't blame them. Like they're kind of avatars in your video game of sports. But one of my favorite parts of this job is getting to know these people and getting to know their stories and to tell their stories. So I understand more people are clicking on the AJ Dennis is transferring story today. Please go read Tip Ryman's story, because one of the things I did is I was there at that camp that he went to work out for Illinois, did not get a scholarship offer. It was a really disappointing experience for him. But I talked to Rod Smith and I showed Tip Ryman the picture of him from that. And I asked him, what do you see when you see it? And his response, like he just poured his heart out and poured out like what the last 4 years and really last 10 years of his life have been. You know the Newton family extremely well. That's why we wanted to send you to Florida. Like you've gotten to know them so well and have earned their trust over the last 4 years to tell the story of what that experience for Johnny on draft day, which was a disappointment, but ultimately a triumph, was all about. So we've made those stories free, unlocked them for you all. So go read those, because we did put a lot of time and effort into those, but it tells you about the people. Like I'm personally disappointed that Isaiah Williams didn't get drafted, because I've watched that kid work for so long. I've known him since he was 15, 16 years old. And I really struggled over, do I go see Tip or do I go see Isaiah Williams? And I thought Tip is a bigger story of the draft right now, of him getting to this moment than even Isaiah Williams was. So I did that. But like I hurt for that kid, because I've gotten to know him really well.
Keith Randolph,
we've gotten to know really well. So Casey, we've gotten to know really well. So we're really happy for him. But we hope we've been able to share the stories of the people that are behind this. And that's why I love doing these draft stories, is because we've seen them from recruit. We've talked to them since recruit all the way to the end of this process, like to bookend the start of their Illini careers to the end. It's really professionally rewarding, and hopefully we do their stories justice.
Nailed it, man. Couldn't agree anymore. I look forward to next year, because I think we're gonna be a year from now. We're gonna have to figure out where we're gonna go, and it's
probably Florida.
Probably Florida. I think that's right. And you know what? It's the best feeling to try to figure out how we're going to navigate our way around here and what it looks like. And it's made possible by people giving us their money every month. And like that part is not lost on us either. They trust us to tell stories that they care about. And like that means so freaking much, because you can get free news places, and to know that we do it in a way that helps you understand things, in a way that helps you understand people, it's the best, man.
Yeah. All right. For Joey Wagner, I'm Jeremy Werner. Thank you to everybody for listening to the Illini Inquirer Podcast. If you're watching this on YouTube, hit that like button on your way out, subscribe to us, hit that notifications bell as well. If you're listening on the podcast, follow us, rate us, review us wherever you get your podcasts, and check out all the latest content at IlliniInquirer.com. Everybody have a great day. Take care of each other. We'll talk to you next time right here on the Illini Inquirer Podcast.